Hello, good morning. This is the final talk of the what we can learn from ignorance, what ignorance can teach us, cycle of seminars that were promoted by the Institute of Advanced Studies of the University of São Paulo with Institute Question of Science. As you online and here at the auditorium can notice I'm speaking English, or trying to, because our guest today is from England, Michael Marshall. Please join us, Marsh. Marsh is one of the founders of the Merseyside Skeptics. He's a member of the Good Thinking Society of England. In 2013, he recorded an interview with the vice president of the Flat Earth Society. There is a Flat Earth Society in England. It's the oldest Flat Earth Society in the world, I guess. And he also went to the first Flat Earth Convention in England. And today he's going to talk to us about these experiences and what Flat Earthers think, what's their mindset, and how did we get to this point when we have to discuss Flat Earth in a university setting. We are just a few messages. We are online. You can watch us at www.iea.usp.br/ao vivo. I won't say ao vivo in English because it's quite crazy. We are being recorded. Questions from the public will be open for questions from the public after Marshall's talk. The questions should be made at the microphone, and please identify yourselves when you ask your questions, and please ask your questions. Don't offer supplementary lectures. Please put your cell phones on silent mode. And to the public that is watching us online, you can send your questions to the following email: iearesponde, all in the same word, iearesponde, @usp.br. Okay, I didn't try to say this in English. It was smart of me. We'll have pictures and video of this lecture at the media library of the Institute of Advanced Studies, www.iea.usp.br/mediateca, or in the YouTube channel within 10 days from this presentation. Marsh, the floor is yours.
Thank you everyone for coming along, and thank you, Carlos, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here in Brazil and to give this lecture. The lecture series, obviously, learning from ignorance, so I guess I am the ignorance that you're going to be learning from today. So I've been involved in skeptical activism for 10 years. I was a co-founder of a community group in the UK as a skeptical activist, the Merseyside Skeptics Society. And then for the last 5 years, I've been the project director of this charity called the Good Thinking Society, set up by a science writer called Simon Singh. And it means that part of my job is to investigate unusual claims. People who are claiming that they can talk to the dead, people who are claiming that they can cure cancer with whatever they want to sell you. All these manner of different claims that people make. Where those claims aren't backed by good evidence, I turn up to try and understand why people believe in these things, understand how they persuade people to follow them. And if they're making very dangerous claims, I work with the media, and I work with regulators, and I sometimes work with the police to get information about those dangerous claims out there so the public can understand why these things don't work, how we can tell what's true and what isn't true. And so that's part of my job. And as in that job, I think I'm the country in the UK, I think I'm the only full-time skeptical investigator in the UK. And then another part of my job is traveling around the UK and occasionally traveling around the world, telling stories about the experiences that I've had and the things that I've learned to try and help people to question these ideas and to explore these ideas. And it does mean that part of my job is to go to rooms filled with strangers and try and encourage those strangers to doubt things. And whenever I tell someone that my job is to encourage strangers to doubt things, someone looks at me as if to say, that isn't really a job, is it? And to those people I say, that's how good I am at making you doubt things, that you even doubt my career, doubt whether my job is even real. So as well as doing these kind of in-person investigations over the last 10 years, I've had another side project where I have a podcast called Be Reasonable. And in that podcast, I talk to people that we disagree with. And instead of having the kind of conversation that I'm sure you may have had in the past with someone you disagree with, maybe online, where you tell them they're wrong and they're an idiot and you show how right you are and you have a big argument, instead of doing that, I try to have a civil discussion and say, we disagree, but I want to know why. I want to try and figure out what we disagree about, why we disagree about it. How do you support a position that I disagree with? Let's have a polite discussion and see if we can learn from each other what that gap is. So I can try and learn as much as possible when people are persuading people to believe in bad ideas. I can learn as much as possible what those people are told and why they're being persuasive. And if I know those arguments, I'm better at speaking to people about why those arguments aren't real, why they don't work. And so in 2013, for Be Reasonable, I interviewed a member of the Flat Earth Society. And ever since then, I've given talks all around the country in the UK, and I've mentioned for years now that I spoke to the Flat Earth Society. And people would look at me and say, oh, come on, there isn't really a flat earth society. People in the world don't really believe the world is flat. This is a made-up thing. These people are joking. They're having fun. They're being silly, but they don't believe it. And so it's very strange to me then that a few years ago, after I've been looking into this for years and years, suddenly it's all over the news. And there's people in the newspapers and people in documentaries who are saying the world is flat, and the movement has exploded. And you may have seen some of these things. So you may have seen, for example, the coverage in several newspapers. There's the BBC's coverage. In fact, there was a conference here in São Paulo only a fortnight ago of flat earthers, and there it is covered in The Guardian, the UK newspaper. And has anyone seen the Netflix documentary, Behind the Curve, which is all about the flat earth movement? So how do we get to this place where it used to be that the flat earth movement was very small and no one had heard of it, and now it's huge, and it seems like there are thousands of people, and it's very prominent? Well, because I've been watching it for a while, I think I can understand and explain that explosion and see what drove that explosion. And to understand it, we have to look a little bit into the history. And so the real modern flat earth movement, it actually goes back to about 1838. There's a chap called Samuel Rowbotham, who was an evangelical creationist. He believed the world was 6,000 years old, that Darwin was wrong, there's no such thing as evolution. And the way that he was proving that the Bible was literally true about the way that the world was created was to say, if you look at the world around us, I can prove to you that the world is flat. And if I can prove the world is flat, I can prove to you that the part of the Bible that says the world is flat must be literally true. And if those are literally true, all the rest of it about it being 6,000 years old and created in 7 days, all of that must be true as well. And he did this in 1870. He had an experiment where he had a friend of his in a rowing boat row along a canal, a flat river in Bedford in England. And he said, if you look at the curvature of the earth as conventional view would have it, after 5 miles of my friend rowing away from me, he should disappear over the horizon. And the curvature should be between me and my friend, and I shouldn't be able to see him. And his friend rowed for 6 miles, and he could still see his friend after 6 miles. And at this point he said, you see, the world has to be flat, because how can there be a curvature that should have my friend out of sight in 5 miles if I can still see him 6 miles away? And what he was missing is that his friend was 6 miles away, and there was a curvature, but light was bending around that curvature in much the same way as light bends when you look at the curved edge of a glass of water, and it distorts an image, and you can see an image in a slightly distorted way. And that's what was happening. His friend was being carried on the bended light over the horizon, but they didn't realize this at the time. And so this was around about sort of the 19th century, and when Samuel Rowbotham, he published all this information in 1881 in a book called Zetetic Astronomy, The Earth is Not a Globe. And these were all of his arguments that he said he's demonstrated, he's observed evidence that the world is actually flat. And when he died, one of his followers, who was an English aristocrat, a very wealthy lady, spent a lot of her money to publish this document as far as possible and get thousands and thousands of people to join the Zetetic Astronomy Club, this idea of the world being flat. The very first ever flat earth society, flat earth group, was called Zetetic Astronomy. And in the late 19th century, there were thousands of members of this group. But as we progressed into the 20th century, decade by decade, the membership started to get smaller and smaller. And I think one of the reasons it got smaller is as we started to experiment and invent and develop air travel, and people were able to get off the ground, the higher up you got, the more you could see the curvature, and the more you could take photographs from that area. And as you're getting into the 40s and 50s, and you're starting to get people going out into space and seeing photos of the Earth from space, people looked at this and said, obviously I was wrong, obviously the world can't possibly be flat, because I can see it's curved. And so zetetic astronomy as a group died. It was almost completely gone. And then in 1956, this chap here, this is Samuel Shenton, who's an evangelical creationist, again, who believed the world was 6,000 years old. He reformed zetetic astronomy as a group called the Flat Earth Society in the UK. First thing to be called the Flat Earth Society in 1956. And he died in the 1970s, 1971, and this chap here, Charles K. Johnston, an evangelical preacher from America, took over the Flat Earth Society, brought it to America, called it the Flat Earth Research Society of America, and used those original arguments from 1838 and 1881 to demonstrate again that the Bible was literally true, the world is 6,000 years old, because I can prove to you that the world is flat. And if I can prove that, I can disprove all of the rest of science wrong, because they're going on this fundamental assumption that I can prove to be false. And so in 2004, the Flat Earth Society was reformed after it had sort of gone almost entirely between the 70s and the 90s. It was reformed again in the UK as the Flat Earth Society by a guy called Daniel Shenton. And this is how I first came across it, this website called the Flat Earth Society. And it was mostly an online forum where people were sharing their arguments about how we know the world is flat, sharing their different proofs and having arguments and debating and trying to find more and more sophisticated ways of demonstrating that anybody who thinks the world is round must be wrong, because I can prove to you the world is flat. And it was this kind of forum that I found very fascinating, because when I interviewed the vice president, Michael Wilmore, in 2013, I learned a couple of things about what the Flat Earth movement was about. That I thought it'd be one collective community, but actually they were split in lots of different interesting ways. Partly, the community was split between people who genuinely, absolutely believed the world was flat, and people who knew for a fact it wasn't, but just enjoyed arguing a position that they knew was false. They enjoyed trying to find inventive and strange and funny ways to demonstrate why everyone else was wrong, even though they knew the world was round. And these were people who were maybe trained physicists, who understood how the world really worked, but wanted to have some fun on the internet, to convince some people and to win arguments that they thought were unwinnable by finding unusual proofs. But the problem is this set of people, who were very well-educated trolls, were so successful that they really convinced the first set even more. And they got more and more people more passionately to believe that the world was actually flat. And they grew the number of passionate believers. So that was one split in the society. The other split in the society that I found fascinating was around what shape the world is. Because when I first came across the idea of the flat Earth, I assumed that everyone had the same idea in mind. You know, much like this kind of logo, where you have the Arctic Circle in the center, and you have all of the continents spread around it, and then you have Antarctica as a ring of ice around the edge of the disk. And that is what some people thought. But there was a really passionate counter-argument. And these people would argue the whole time. And the other side of this argument would be, yes, the Arctic Circle was in the middle, and yes, there were countries spread around it, and yes, there was ice. But instead of the ice being a single line around the edge of the disk that kept us all in, this other side of the argument thought that ice went on forever in all directions. There was no end to the ice. They believed that the world was an infinite plane in all directions that bisects reality. And I love this idea of it being infinity that bisects reality. There is above reality and below reality, but you can't get from the ground, from below to above, because the ice goes on forever. And this was a very passionate argument that was happening in the flat Earth world in 2013 when I came across it. And people would have very aggressive arguments about why, no, it's infinity forever. No, it's a disk. But both these arguments struggle to explain some things about the world. And you may, if you think about them for a while, you might find some of the things that are problematic. One of the things that's a real problem for both versions of the world is gravity. It's very difficult to explain gravity as we observe it if you don't have a spherical Earth with a large mass in the center that pulls people towards that central mass. You can't explain gravity very easily otherwise. But the problem is the Flat Earth Society had this collection of people who were well educated, knew it was nonsense, but enjoyed trying to argue it anyway. And they said, well, what is gravity? Gravity is a force that accelerates downwards. You know, if you let go of something, it will accelerate towards the floor at 9.8 meters per second squared. Every second it gets faster by 9.8 meters per second until the ground stops its acceleration. That, they said, was identical to a world in which when you let go of something, it stays still and the ground comes up to meet it. So they said, gravity isn't pulling things down, but in fact, the entire world is traveling upwards and getting faster and faster and faster, and that's why things fall. They stay still and the ground comes up to meet it. They said the Earth is an infinite plane in all directions that bisects reality and is accelerating upwards at 9.8 meters per second squared, and that's how gravity works according to them. But people would look at these arguments and say, well, if you are accelerating forever, there is a problem with that. And there's physicists in the room, I'm sure. What's the problem with accelerating forever? The speed of light, absolutely. So people would argue and say, you must be wrong, because if you accelerate forever, eventually you're going to overtake the speed of light, and you can't do that. It's the speed limit of the universe. But we have these educated trolls who are having fun. And they say, well, you're right that you can't go faster than the speed of light, but if you look at Einstein's theory of relativity, it says that as you approach light speed, time begins to slow down. And what's happening is the Earth is accelerating more and more, but time is slowing down, and it all works back out again. And so the problem here was, the people who would go in and try and argue that the world was actually round, they wouldn't think about any of these arguments before they started the argument. They would think, well, I know the world is round. I've never thought about it before, but I know it must be true. And therefore, I must be able to tell all these people why they're wrong. And they would go in and they would bring up points that would be the first thing you would think of if you were to argue with a flat earther. But what they would miss is that the flat earthers would also have thought about that, and they are still flat earthers. So they must have an answer. And so people wouldn't do the research to figure out the answers to their questions. They would go in and say, I know better than you, I can tell you you're completely wrong. And they'd lose the argument. And people would see people who were round earthers coming along and losing the argument, and it would persuade people that the world was actually flat. And so these arguments were actually getting more and more people to believe the world was flat. But it didn't go viral. There weren't thousands and tens of thousands of people. It wasn't all over the media. And I think part of the reason for that is that the arguments were quite sophisticated. You had to understand basically what Einstein's theory of relativity was before you could understand how it explained gravity in a flat Earth universe. And you can't do that by sticking it on a picture with some text and sticking it on Facebook and having 50,000 people share it. So the arguments were sophisticated enough to prevent people being able to prove them wrong, but they were so sophisticated that they were stopping them spreading even further, because you had to really understand them to spread them. And this is where the flat Earth was when I first encountered it in 2013. So I've got a few versions of what the flat Earth looked like. This on the right there, that's the conventional model, the AE model, the azimuthal equidistant model that you might think of with the Arctic Circle in the middle. The second one is what the Vice President had in his mind. He said this better explains the way that ships can travel around the world and how long they take to travel around. So this is his version of the flat Earth. And this one on the far left here, this is one version of the infinity of ice model, the infinite plane model. And the reasoning behind this argument goes, if we are beings that are stood on land in the middle of the water, in the middle of the ice, we're basically in a puddle. And if we're in a puddle, maybe there's another puddle. And if there's another puddle, there might be more land. And if there's more land, there might be more beings. And that's where aliens come from. So if aliens are visiting us all the time, where are they coming from? Well, to the flat earthers, they're coming from a different puddle. So this, I think, is an example of what happens if you have an existing pseudoscientific idea in your mind that we are being visited by aliens all the time, and then you come across an idea like flat Earth that might not be able to explain aliens very well. Instead of throwing out the aliens, you put the two together and you form a new theory. Here's my version of flat Earth that can also account for aliens. And in fact, this better explains aliens, because now we know where the aliens are coming from. So this is the kind of thing that was going on in flat Earth in 2013. But this wasn't going viral. This wasn't shared by thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So how did we get to a point where it exploded? Well, I think one of those things that exploded it is the publishing of this book in 2016. This is an ebook and a YouTube series by Eric Dubay. And of the many flat earthers I've spoken to a few dozen flat earthers, I think, at this point, the vast majority cite this video as one of the reasons they got into the flat earth. This was persuasive to them. So this is 3 years after those arguments about Einstein's theory of relativity and the infinity of ice and gravity. 3 years, you'd imagine, of making their arguments more robust, more sophisticated, better. What are the arguments in this book? Well, the first argument is the horizon looks flat. Show me the horizon, I can't see a curve. You can't tell me that my eyes are wrong. When I look out across the water at the beach and I look across the sea, it looks flat. How can you tell me that my eyes are wrong? Basic observation tells me that I'm right. They said water always goes flat. This is the third argument. It comes up a lot with flat earthers. You can have land and it will be hills and it'll be valleys, it'll be lumpy, it'll be up and down. But water will always go flat. If you fill a bathtub with water, eventually it'll be completely still on top. And once it's still on top, you can measure that surface and they say it'll be completely flat. They say that water can't stick to a curved surface. If you have a bowl which has a curvature in the middle, the top of the water will still be flat. You can't get water to bend at all, according to these arguments. They say that rivers always run downhill, but if your surface is curved and your river starts here and the sea is there, the river has to go uphill to get to the sea. And the argument also explains, it also says that in the southern hemisphere, where we are now obviously, if you have a river in the southern hemisphere and it has to go to the sea, it's going to go all the way uphill. And you can't have water run uphill, and therefore basic common sense tells you the world has to be flat because water can't run uphill. They say, what about experts? They say if you speak to a pilot about when their plane is traveling at a cruising altitude and they travel in a straight line, they say if a plane was genuinely traveling in a straight line, which is what pilots say is happening, if the world was curved and that was happening, what you'd see is this. The plane would take off and it would fly in a straight line off into space. So they say the only way for a plane to stay at a consistent altitude above a curved surface is if the pilot continually points the nose down to stop it flying off into space. But when you talk to pilots, they say there's never a point in the journey where they have to start pointing the nose down towards the ground again and correct their course downwards. And this, they say, is because the Earth isn't curved, it's actually flat, and when they travel, they're traveling in a flat line. They say, what about the movement of things through the air? They say if you shot a cannonball from north to south on a world that was spherical and traveling at 1,000 miles an hour to the west, what would happen if you're stood on that, stood next to the cannon rather, is the second the cannonball leaves the cannon would spin away at 1,000 miles an hour, and the cannonball would carry on traveling straight. And so if you're stood next to the cannon and you're spinning with the cannon, you would see the cannonball leave the cannon and fly at 1,000 miles an hour in the opposite direction. And they say that isn't what happens, and that's because the world isn't spinning, and it isn't spinning because it isn't round, it's flat. They say if a helicopter was genuinely on an Earth that was traveling at 1,000 miles an hour to the west, the second the helicopter lifted off the ground to hover over the same spot, the ground would move beneath it at 1,000 miles an hour. And so to travel in a helicopter, all you need to do is lift up and wait for your destination to get to you, and then land again. But they say that isn't how helicopters work because they say the world isn't spinning, it's stationary, it's flat, as the Bible tells us. They say, this is genuinely argument 113, that if the world is spherical, countries in the southern hemisphere like Australia, like Brazil, they'd be upside down and people would fall off. This is the level of sophistication of their arguments. 189 is that the Bible says the world is flat and unmoving and therefore it must be. 191, well, Pythagoras, Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, Neil Armstrong, they were all Freemasons, therefore the world is flat. This is genuinely the level of argument in Eric Dubay's 200 Proofs. And I think what's interesting about this book is this is a hugely influential book. The vast majority of flat earthers I've met have said this is what changed their mind. This is what opened up their eyes to the truth. And I think the reason this book is so successful and this video series is so successful is because the types of arguments that it makes are, first of all, very easy to understand at a gut level. They don't go into deep and complicated formula or equations. They speak at a common sense level incorrectly, but they speak at what would be a gut level. And they cover all manner of different subjects. So if you are someone who is interested in basic observations and what you can see, there are arguments in there to say what you can see proves the world is flat. If you're already interested in conspiracy theory, there's arguments in there to say why the flat earth is actually a conspiracy theory. If you're somebody who believes the world is creationist, it was invented 6,000 years ago, created by God in 7 days, there are arguments in there to say, well, creationism tells us that the world is actually flat. And so it covers all these different types of communities who might be persuaded and gives them something that fits with what they believe. And I think this is why it's incredibly persuasive and why it's so influential. And this has been seen by thousands of people. It was very persuasive to the people that I've spoken to. One of the other most persuasive arguments, or one of the most important moments in the last 5 years, really, of Flat Earth, is the publishing of videos by this chap here. This is Mark Sargent. If you've seen the Netflix documentary Behind the Curve, he's the main person in that documentary, really. And Mark Sargent is someone who believed that there was all these conspiracies before he came to Flat Earth. So he said that JFK, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated by the US government, that the moon landing was faked, it never really happened. That there used to be a civilization that lived on Mars, and they carved a face on a mountain on Mars. These are all the things he believed. And he said in 2014, he was watching a moon landing video on YouTube, and YouTube recommended a Flat Earth video to him. And he thought, the world can't be flat, this is ridiculous. I'm going to watch this and prove how wrong it is. And he said he watched the video and spent 9 months trying to disprove it, trying to prove why it can't be true. And when he said after 9 months he couldn't disprove this video, he said, I was left with no other choice but to accept it must be true. Of course, in doing that, what he's done is he's thrown out the expertise of anybody whose field of expertise involves demonstrating or using arguments or using evidence that the world is actually round. All of that expertise, all of that scientific knowledge, you throw out because you can't personally disprove a video. You might not have access to that knowledge, but if it's not yours, if you don't already have those observations, you throw it away because you can't personally disprove these things. And this is how he came to be a flat earther. And I interviewed him in 2017 after he'd produced a series of videos called Flat Earth Clues in 2015. Hugely influential, I think the second or joint first most influential series of videos on Flat Earth on YouTube. So because I'd already spoken to flat earthers at this point, I thought, well, when I interview Mark Sargent, the first thing I'll ask is, what version of flat earth do you believe in? Because I think it's important to understand what's in the other person's head and that we have a shared understanding of the topic we're talking about before we start to investigate it more. And he said, well, he does believe that the world is actually a disc shape with the Arctic Circle in the middle, but not only is it a disc shape, but it's underneath a dome. And he said it's very much based on the film The Truman Show. It's Jim Carrey, where he lives in a giant dome as part of a reality TV experiment. He doesn't realize he's in the dome. But Mark Sargent says it's no coincidence that it's like the film The Truman Show, because the people in charge of Hollywood know that we live in a giant dome, and they put the film out The Truman Show to confuse people. So if people start to say, I think we live in a giant dome, they could be dismissed. Oh, you've seen the film The Truman Show and you took it too seriously. You're thinking of fiction there. So he thinks the people who know that the world is under a dome are actually the same people as who control Hollywood. And if you can imagine what that means, we'll get to there shortly. So how do we know that this is true? Well, he says there's a few different clues. And one of the clues, he says in the 1960s, the USA, Soviet Russia, they were engaged in the Cold War. They were intimidating each other from across the world. And one of the ways that they would intimidate each other is to try and find a base, a military base that they could use of strategic importance to show how important and to intimidate from. And obviously, Russia tried to get a base in Cuba as part of this kind of expansionist program, this expansionist strategy. And part of that expansion was both the USA and Soviet Russia looked to Antarctica, to try and have a military base in Antarctica to exploit the mineral wealth and to be able to intimidate from there. But according to Mark Sargent, when the USA and Soviet Russia got to Antarctica, they found the edge. That's when they hit the wall that is at Antarctica that keeps us in the dome. And at this point, according to Mark Sargent, the Cold War was over. USA and Russia agreed to hide the truth of the dome from the rest of the world and pretend to still be at war. And everything in the next 30 years nearly of Cold War was a lie that they were perpetrating to keep everybody believing that they were still at war, to hide the truth of the dome from the world and everyone around them. And they say, if you look at those evidence, Mark Sargent says, of this being true, if you look at the long-range missile capability testing of the USA in the 60s and 70s and onwards, they would fire those long-range missiles straight up in the air. Why, says Mark Sargent, would you fire a long-range missile straight up in the air to see how far you can shoot it? If you want to see how far you can shoot it, Mark Sargent says, you shoot it as far as you can. But why shoot it straight up in the air? Well, Mark Sargent said it's because they were trying to figure out how high up the dome was. They were using their missiles to bomb the ceiling on top of the world to see what it was made of and to see where the dome ended, to see where the parameters of our world are. Now, I would argue, if you genuinely have an opponent who is in this kind of phony war, this Cold War, this intimidatory war, you don't want them to know what your capabilities are while you're testing it. So you shoot it straight up in the air and work out from the thrust how far it could go. And that way, it's much harder for your enemy to track these long-range missiles and understand what your capabilities are. And also, you don't accidentally bomb somewhere because you're shooting a missile. But no, Mark Sargent says they were trying to bomb the ceiling on top of the world. But he says this isn't all supposition. There is evidence of this. And one of the points of evidence that he brought up was the gravestone of Werner von Braun. So Werner von Braun is the rocket scientist who was smuggled out of Nazi Germany after the Second World War. It was his technology that led to the V2 rockets that were responsible for the Blitz of London and various other kind of blitzes from the Nazi expansion. And he was smuggled out of out of Germany into America under Operation Paperclip, and they used that V2 rocket technology, that Nazi rocket technology, to power the US space race and to get the US to the moon. It was his rockets that led to, or that inspired and drove that technology for the USA, which is true. But Mark Sargent says, if he was the father of space race, the father of rocket science, why does his gravestone quote Psalms 19:1? This is a dead giveaway. This is a clue as to what was really going on. Because Psalms 19:1 reads, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." Well, the firmament is the biblical name for the lid on top of the world, the roof of the world. So why would the father of rocket technology on his gravestone have a reference to there being a dome, there being a roof on top of the world? This, says Mark Sargent, is proof that he's confessing from beyond the grave that all of that work after the war was a lie, and that everything he did was actually part of this giant hoax, and there's a lid on top of the world. Now, I would argue, actually, the quote is much more about the heavens declaring the glory of God for a man who saw his technology as the key to the heavens. It was his rockets that got us into space. And so he's saying, I allowed us to witness the glory of God from space. But no, Mark Sargent says this is a confession. Actually, there was a roof on top of the world, and he had to go along with it in order to get out of Nazi Germany. So once we accept that there's a dome on top of the world, what else does the universe look like? Well, according to Mark Sargent, there are no stars and planets out there in the solar system or out there in the universe. Those are projections on the dome or paintings on the dome, like in a planetarium. I gave this talk in Rio Planetarium last week, and I said Mark Sargent thinks we're just in a really, really big planetarium, and the stars look like they're very far away, but they're just painted or projected onto the curved dome of the world. He says the sun and moon do exist, but they're just outside of the dome, and they have their own separate light, and they move around independently. And I said, well, how do they move around? And he said, well, this is the important thing. At the moment, we can't even accept the truth that we're in a dome. They're hiding that truth from us. But if we accept that truth, we can start asking the big questions, like who put the sun and moon there and why did they do it? But we're not even allowed to accept the truth of the dome, so we don't get to the important questions, like what's beyond the dome and who's in charge of the sun. So at this point in the interview with Mark, I thought, I want to try and understand, how do you sense check? How do you understand, how do you question whether you're right or wrong, and what was Mark's standard of evidence? And could Mark change his mind on one of these ideas? And so I said to Mark, you used to believe in all these different conspiracy theories. Is there a conspiracy theory that you used to believe in, but you no longer believe to be true? So maybe that'll help me understand, can Mark change his mind? And we can start in that avenue. And he said, yes. And he said, I'm glad you asked me that, because I used to wonder, why were all these different conspiracy theories all true? And then I realized it all made sense, that the US government killed JFK because they knew we could never get to the moon. We'd have to hoax the moon landing because we can't get to the moon because there's a dome there because the Earth is flat. So once you understand that the world is flat, all of the other conspiracy theories make sense. It's like it's the key to all the other conspiracies. But he said, except one. There's one I no longer believe in, and I believe it's so false that I need to meet the person who invented it to see why he came up with it. He said, I no longer believe that there was ever a civilization on Mars. And I said, yes, but that's because you no longer believe in Mars. You no longer believe that Mars exists. There can't be a civilization on something if it's not actually there. That's not quite the question I was asking, is that you aren't dismissing the civilization on Mars, you're dismissing the existence of Mars, which is getting further from reality, according to me, rather than getting closer to it. But Mark Sargent's work has been hugely influential, and the flat earthers that I meet, he's the father, really, of the most modern flat earth movement. And this is one version of what the flat earth might look like according to Mark Sargent under the dome. This is taken from his website. I don't think he thinks this is literally true, but this is a drawing of the kind of thing that might be true, an under a dome version of the world. And so this was becoming huge on YouTube. And what was happening is that people who would view moon landing stuff on YouTube would be recommended these videos about flat Earth. And if they viewed one of these videos about flat Earth, they'd be recommended another one. And the more they watched, the more they were shown by YouTube, because YouTube just wanted them to keep watching YouTube. Didn't care what they were showing them, so long as you're putting the hours in, sat in front of YouTube. And so when one video goes up about flat Earth, and people put up a response video about how they believe it, and how passionate now they are about flat Earth, all these different videos end up being recommended to one another and becomes this kind of network that the more you're watching, the more you're given to watch, and the more you're sent down this rabbit hole, the more you're radicalized into being a flat earther. And this was starting to impact a lot of people and start to convert a lot of people. In fact, at the last meeting of the American Academy of Sciences, there was a paper presented where they went to the American Flat Earth Convention and asked people, what persuaded you that the world was flat? And of the 40 people they spoke to, 39 of them said, I saw it on YouTube. That's what converted me. I saw YouTube videos. And the 40th person said, my son told me about it. He saw it on YouTube. So YouTube has been a huge driver of this movement. And I can explain why if people want to know a little bit later about the technological reasons why I think YouTube is responsible and why this works. But it goes beyond YouTube. In fact, this was actually in Chester, a city near where I live, where people have gone on the street to preach the truth about the flat Earth. And you can see there, Flat Earth 200 Proofs is on his poster, so it's the Eric Dubay arguments. And this is a chap from a Flat Earth group in Chester. And if you're anything like me, and you're interested in these kind of things, when you find out there's a Flat Earth group that meet 20 miles away from where you live, you go along, and you meet these people, and you go and sit in the pub, and you have drinks with them, and you try and understand what they're about. I didn't go to tell them why they were wrong. I didn't go to tell them why I was better than them or superior to them. I went to understand what brings people together around this idea. How do people justify this idea to themselves? What do they talk about? And I found some fascinating things out. I was told, first of all, you can never trust any experiment you haven't personally done. Information someone else has come up with could be compromised, you can't check it, you can't be sure it's true. So only trust the experiments you can personally do. Which is very handy if it means that you can dismiss anything done in space and anything done at the Large Hadron Collider, anything done with any technology you haven't got in your kitchen, you can dismiss. But it's this idea of elevating your own personal observations, your own personal logic above anything anyone else can do. Anyone else's expertise means nothing compared to what you can figure out for yourself. I was also told you can never trust photographs. Show me a photo of the world from space, they would tell me, and I'll show you a composite image. I'll show you a Photoshop job. I'll show you a con. I'll show you a hoax. Because you can't trust where those photos came from. Digital media is too easily manipulated. You don't know who put it together, what their agenda was, what work they've done to it. You can never, ever, ever trust photographs. Whereas YouTube videos, you can trust. In fact, here's this YouTube video that proves the world is flat. In fact, they would say to me, here's a YouTube video of an experiment someone's done that proves the world is flat. And I said, well, have you done this experiment? No. So, well, what happened to not trusting experiments you haven't personally done? What happened to not trusting digital media because it can be manipulated? When it comes to being something that supports your own argument, the standard of evidence was much lower. And I think this is something that we're probably all guilty of in some way. You know, when we're having arguments, the thing we find that agrees with what we think, we don't question it as much as the thing we find that disagrees. You know, and if you're having an argument with someone online, how many times have you gone to find the first link that proves you right? Whether you've fully read it, whether it's reflective of the best available evidence. No, it agrees with me, have that, I'm right, you're wrong. I don't need to investigate this. It fits with my own personal beliefs. And I think we see this in Flat Earth in a much, much bigger way. I was told gravity doesn't exist. There is only density. The reason you stick to the ground is because you are denser than the air. Very similar way to if you had a very light liquid and you poured a heavy liquid into it, the heavy liquid would sink to the bottom. It's happening because of density, which is true. But the reason density works that way is because of gravity. Gravity is the reason that heavy things fall, whether they're liquids in density or not. So they're not interrogating their ideas fully. They're finding something to dismiss what everyone else thinks as easy as possible. And I think we see this an awful lot. We were told again, water always finds its level. Water always falls flat. It never ever curves. It never bends. You can never get water to bend. This was happening in a pub. And I did at this point in the conversation when they said, water never ever bends, you can never show me water bending as a result of gravity or anything like that. I did say to them, if you want to see water bending as a result of forces exerted on it and bending as a result of pressure, follow me to the bathroom and I will demonstrate it very visibly. They didn't take me up on that particular argument. So this was the Flat Earth meeting in a local pub, but it actually, as you guys probably already know, it gets much bigger than local pub events. And in fact, Just last week, there was FlatCon Brazil here in Sao Paulo. 400 people attended. Unfortunately, I wasn't here for that. I arrived a week too late, which is a shame because I would have loved to have gone. My wife wouldn't have enjoyed going, but I would have loved to have attended this convention. But you can see from their own report on Facebook the kind of arguments that were being made. They said, shouldn't we feel the earth moving? If it's moving, we should feel it. This is straight out of Eric Dubay's 200 Proofs. They're saying, how do creationists who still believe in a spherical earth explain the flood? The ball can't be filled with water, there's no way. So it's very clearly making it clear that the flat earth movement is still at its heart a creationist argument, that the world is 6,000 years old, invented as described in the book of Genesis. And here we have Jota Martin saying there is no global warming because there is no globe, bringing another conspiracy theory in. And this is something we see all the time. It's not just one conspiracy theory that the world is flat. As we'll see in a moment, it's all these other conspiracy theories are part of it too. But I didn't go to FlatCon Brazil. I did go to the UK version of it in April 2018. There was 160 people in the room when I found out about it. Of course, the first thing I did was buy a ticket and go along to spend 3 full days in a hotel in Birmingham hearing about why the world was flat. And it's one of the most fun weekends I've ever spent in my life. It was genuinely fascinating. It was my wife is taking issue with that. We've had lots of fun weekends, but this is one of the most fun weekends I've ever spent. And I went there again, not to tell people how wrong they were, not to tell people how much better than them I was. I want to try and understand, what do people talk about? How do people justify this? How do people explain this to each other? What brings people to that world? I want to tell you a little bit about what I experienced there, because I think it helps illustrate what the Flat Earth movement is about, I think. So one of the speakers was Iru Landucci. He also spoke in FlatCon Brazil last week. He's an Argentinian conspiracy theorist and YouTuber. He's put videos up all about the New World Order, 9/11 truth, anti-GMO, anti-vaccines. He's been a flat earth believer since 2014, which curiously is after I first found out about flat earth world. I haven't met, I think, any flat earthers who've been looking into the flat earth movement as long as I have. It's quite a recent phenomenon, even amongst the biggest speakers. And here's Iru talking on Argentinian television about Tierra Plana, the flat earth. So Iru was fascinating for a couple of different reasons. First of all, there was a mix-up with Iru's timing. He thought he had 2 hours to give a presentation when he only had an hour. And the organizer introduced him by saying, oh, we had this confusion, but we've sorted it out. He's going to give his talk in 2 halves. And so Iru gave the first half of his talk on Saturday morning, and it took about an hour and a half. And he gave the second half of his talk on Saturday afternoon, and it took an hour. And then he gave the third half of his talk on Sunday morning, and it took another 2 hours. So there was a huge amount of material here. But what was interesting was, of all the material that was being presented, a huge amount of it had nothing to do with the flat earth. It had to do with all these other ideas. So for example, he said that the UN, United Nations, is a front for the one world order, the one world global government. And we know that this is definitely true because if you look at the Spanish name for the UN, it is the ONU. And the ONU backwards is UNO, which is Spanish for one. So this is proof that the UN is a front for the one world order because the reverse acronym of it in Spanish is the same as the Spanish word for one. And this is a dead giveaway, this is a clear clue. Now, I was at this convention with a friend of mine. At this point, she did lean over and says, does Iru realize that UN is already French for one? Because you could have cut a lot of that logic out if you switch language and start looking at UN in French, because un is French for one. So you could have shortcut all of that logic by picking a different language. He said if you look at dinosaurs, the reason dinosaurs, you see pictures of them, they don't look real. The reason they look like a mix of alligators and rhinos and giraffes is that the artist that was paid by the one world government to invent dinosaurs drew from those animals as inspiration. So it's not because there is a familial relationship through evolution over millions of years that mean these animals are related to dinosaurs. No, it's nothing to do with that. It's because the dinosaurs were invented. And they were invented because the world is 6,000 years old. And the Bible's literally true. And therefore, we can't have ever had dinosaurs. There hasn't been enough time. So we're going straight back to creationist arguments here. He said that the protocols of the Elders of Zion prove that the Jesuits are in control and they intend all these malicious things about the world. If you want to know why the one world order is being run, and all these wars are happening and all these disasters and tragedies and evil things are happening, it's because it's all in the book, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now this made my blood run cold. because the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a very famous document. It's a Hawke's book written in the 19th century, which claims actually that the Jews are in control of the world and they have all these evil plans. And it's been completely debunked. The work was actually ripped off from a work of fiction about Machiavelli, the Italian politician in hell. It's a work of satirical fiction about him in hell. And it was ripped off from that and labeled as being a transcript of a meeting of the elders of Zion, the elderly Jews who run the world. So we had this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory being brought up at the Flat Earth Convention. And what shocked me is nobody seemed to be concerned about that at all. When we're now hearing about how there's this anti-Semitic conspiracy ruling the world, making all the evil things happen, nobody seems to be concerned. I thought I'd be there to hear about how the world was flat. I'm hearing all this other stuff. He also said that if there's any atheists there, I'm an atheist myself. He said, I might think, he thinks that atheists might think they don't worship a god, but actually atheists come from the word athos, which is a Greek mountain god. So that atheists are actually secretly worshipping a Greek mountain god called Athos. And that worship might be so secret they don't even realize. It might be secret from themselves that they're doing it. Now, the word atheist doesn't come from athos, it comes from a theist. But we saw this kind of manipulation of language all the time. And this was endemic of a certain type of flat earth argument, which was just throwing all sorts of things out there. All sorts of ideas, all sorts of conspiracy theories, not backing things up by evidence, not doing rigorous research, rigorous study, just throwing ideas out and proclaiming them as facts. So that was Iru Landucci. One of my favorite things about Iru, actually, was when he was introduced, the organizer said Iru actually arrived in Birmingham 24 hours earlier than was expected. He said, we expect him to arrive on Friday, and he arrived on Thursday, or it was Thursday, Wednesday, something like that. And they said it was this hilarious kind of mix-up that I had to run to the airport to rescue him because they didn't expect him to arrive for another day. And isn't this a mix-up? But I heard that story, and I thought, yeah, I bet that happens all the time when your worldview can't account for the international dateline. When you can't explain why it's a different day in different parts of the world. Does this kind of thing happen all the time? I'm not sure. So that was one type of the lecturers that we saw was Iru Landucci. A good example of the other type of lecturer that I saw is a chap called Dave Murphy. So Dave's a really interesting character. He was a former software engineer on Wall Street, a computer programmer who used to work in the financial district of New York. At the same time, he was a volunteer fireman in New Jersey. And he was a volunteer fireman in New Jersey when September 11th happened. And he wasn't involved in the cleanup or rescue operation, but he knew people that were. And obviously it hugely affected him as it affected the entire city of New York and all of America and arguably the entire world. And it deeply affected him. And he said, as a result, in 2005, he became a 9/11 truther. He said what he saw that day proved to him it couldn't have been that the official story was true. It had to be the case that the government was involved in bringing down those towers, in making all this thing happen. He also said that in 2005, he suffered what he describes as a midlife crisis that leads him to live an off-the-grid lifestyle. And that off-the-grid lifestyle since 2011 has involved drinking his own urine and washing in his own urine each morning. Because he believes that urine has all these curative properties. He said that urine reverses aging, is helpful with AIDS, with cancer, with smallpox, and more than 60 other conditions. All of these different conditions, he says, can be alleviated or cured by drinking your own urine, washing your own urine, injecting your own urine, using your urine as a magical cure for everything. Now, Dave wasn't speaking about urine therapy and being able to cure cancer, but he was selling a book about it. He was there at this Flat Earth Convention. I didn't expect to be seeing someone who says you can cure cancer with urine speaking at a Flat Earth Convention. So Dave came to Flat Earth in 2014. He said he came after looking at curvature calculations about the way that the world worked. And he was interviewed on Macedonian television. And the arguments he made were very similar to the ones that we've already seen. You know, Antarctica, the explorers there found the edge of the dome. Planes can't travel faster than the spinning of the world. Planes can't land on a runway if that runway is traveling at 1,000 miles an hour. How is a plane going to hit a runway that's moving at 1,000 miles an hour on the ground? Similar kind of arguments to what we've seen. And he made these arguments in this Macedonian television program where he speaks for an hour. And this interview on YouTube is the third biggest thing, I think, the third most influential thing of getting people to believe that the world is flat. Many of the people that I met at the UK Flat Earth Convention came there because they saw this video of Dave explaining to it. And what happened with this video is you had the host was not prepared to have these kind of arguments made. They thought, we'll interview a flat earther, but they hadn't really looked into flat earth arguments to understand what arguments were going to be made. And they were blown away by the types of arguments being made because they hadn't really done the research in it. And then the last type of speaker I want to talk about is Darren Nesbitt. Darren Nesbitt, I think, is the most fascinating speaker that I've met in the flat earth world. So again, he was a conspiracy theorist who believed that 9/11 was an inside job, the Illuminati were in control of the world, the Boston Marathon bombing was a false flag operation perpetrated by the people who run the world. He became a flat earther in 2015. I interviewed him in 2018. And the reason I think he was so fascinating were that the types of things he was saying to the audience I thought were entirely unexpected. First of all, he told the audience the most important thing is be your own authority. Don't listen to the authority of other people. Just because they've got an impressive job title or an impressive job or an impressive amount of authority, it doesn't mean that they're right. Question it for yourself, which I thought was exactly what I would tell a flat earth audience. Don't just listen to people's authority. Look into their arguments. See if those arguments work. He also said do evidence-based skeptical research. That's exactly what I would tell an audience of flat earthers. Do evidence-based skeptical research. Look at the evidence. Be skeptical. Look into whether these things actually work. So his two mantras were exactly what I would tell that exact same audience. The other thing he did that I thought was utterly fascinating was he shared what he described as the flat earth questionnaire. A list of 10 questions you should ask yourself if you're a flat earther. And the questions were yes or no questions, where it was things like, do you find more and more that you can only socialize with people who accept the truth of the flat earth? Do you find more and more that your conversations with people keep coming back to the flat earth? Do you find yourself believing that most people's problems would go away if they just accepted the truth that the world was flat? And you can see in the audience, as he's asking these questions, people are smiling and nudging their friend and acknowledging themselves. They can see themselves. They're saying yes to these questions. These questions describe their lives. They can see themselves here. And once there's enough of a murmur gone through the audience and enough of a sort of laughing and giggling as that everyone recognizes themselves in these questions, Dave points out that these 10 questions are the red flag questions that you may be in a cult. It's a cult questionnaire. If you're saying yes to these questions, these are signs that you might be in a cult, and you should investigate whether what you believe is actually a cult belief, which I thought was fascinating for a flat earther to be bringing this up to flat earthers, that flat earth may be a cult. But he's still a flat earther. So I think there's something very interesting going on with Darren. One of the reasons he thinks flat earthers are a cult, he says this model cannot possibly be true. We can tell for certain this model can't be true using basic observations. So he said, we've never seen the edge. There's no photographs of the edge, no video of the edge. We've got airplanes and drones and helicopters. By now we would have seen something. We've never seen any indication that there is an edge, that there is a wall. He said, what about the distances in the north and south? For the flat earth to be true, the southern hemisphere would have to be extremely, I can't point at the screen, unfortunately, my pointer. The southern hemisphere would have to be much more spread out, because in a circular version, a spherical version of the world, the southern hemisphere is going towards the shortest part at the point of the circumference. But in a circular version of the world, a flat version, everything would have to be spread out around the edges. And that isn't the case. He said the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, they both see different sets of stars. How would that be true in this model, where the northern hemisphere would be towards the center of the circle and the southern hemisphere would be towards the circumference? How would it be possible for someone in Australia and someone in South America to see the same constellations, but nobody in the northern hemisphere in Europe could see them? That would be impossible if the world was flat and we're all looking at the same set of stars. He said, what about the equator and the observations we have of centuries of sailors sailing around the world and how long it takes? We know that going around the North Pole and the South Pole is the shortest way to get from point A all the way around to point A again, and the longest way to do that is to go around the equator. But in this version, that couldn't possibly be true, because the longest way would be around the circumference, which would be what we would call the South Pole. She said, this can't possibly work. It has to be lies. It was given to you by the people who want to throw you off the scent about what the world really looks like. The people who control the world and want to make people doubt the flat earth, they put this out as a lie that people couldn't possibly believe if they really investigated it. What I thought fascinating about that was, after pointing out why this model has to be a lie, the next speaker who gets up and talks about this model, nobody in the audience seems to be disturbed by that. Nobody in the audience says, well, what about the last guy who just proved this model was wrong? Everybody goes back to accepting this model. It's not about having to figure out exactly what version of the world is true. It's about accepting that what everybody else thinks is false. Once we accept that, it doesn't matter what flavor of true we are. We just know that everyone else is wrong. So what does Darren Nesbitt believe? Well, he showed a version of the world that he says works much better. And his version of the world, where you can travel across the north and the south in the same amount of time, and the equator takes the longest to get across, his version is this. And so you can see there, for the points of the diamond across the center, that would be the longest way. That's the equator. That would take the longest to get from point A to point B. And going across the north and the south would take about the same amount of time. So this isn't a terrible model, but it does suffer from some drawbacks. And if you look at it for long enough, you might spot a couple of those problems with this model for if this is what the world actually looks like. And one of those problems is the edge. You know, if you sail towards the west, eventually you drop off the edge into whatever's beyond that. But Darren Nesbitt says that's only if you believe that there is an edge. But if instead what is actually happening is there's a four-dimensional time-space warp going along each of those edges, this all starts to make sense. Because now, if you travel to the west, you go through the time-space warp and you reappear back from the east. Like Pac-Man. You go off to the left, you come back onto the right, you can travel forever. The Pac-Man version of reality. Now, I look at this model and say, well, actually, this does fit a little bit better with observations about the world. So this is better than that circular version, better than the flat disk version. But this time-space warp, having to invent a four-dimensional time-space warp, is a bit of a problem. But this model can be improved if you just hold it up and bend that diamond backwards until the yellow line meets the yellow line and the red line meets the red line. And what you then have is a three-dimensional object that allows all the things that Darren talked about, but doesn't require the invention of a four-dimensional time-space warp. And in fact, if you take more measurements than just at the North Pole, South Pole, and the equator, if you take multiple measurements all the way along that four-dimensional time-space warp to see what happens where you appear on the other side and connect those up, you get back to a sphere. So I think what's happening is Darren is actually rejecting the flat Earth model and getting, in my opinion, closer and closer to a sphere. And I hope one day he'll be able to get back to the sphere. I don't know whether he will, but I'd like to believe that he's able to investigate his own ideas enough to get back to a sphere. So those are some of the different types of speakers and some of the different ideas that we saw presented at the Flat Earth Conference. But how do we know that these aren't true? What about those arguments that flat earthers make that seem so persuasive to people? How do we explain some of these things? Well, I think I can explain a few of them. For example, this is from a flat earth meme. This flat earth meme is called "Show me the horizon, show me the curvature. Where is the curve?" In this image, it's very clear that the horizon is very clearly flat. This is straight from their literature, straight from their memes. But even in their image, if we apply a ruler, you can see there's a curvature. It meets in the center, it doesn't meet right at the edge. There's very clearly a gap. It's just that the curve is very, very subtle. And this is what's going on, unfortunately, is that this is what the world looks like. You know, 24,901 miles in circumference. But we never get to see it like that, or very few of us ever get to see the entire world in one view. We don't get to see the curvature fully in our own sphere of vision. We don't even get to see that much curvature. We don't even get to see that much curvature. We might get to see a bit like that much curvature. And when you compare that to the circle, already just by zooming in on that initial circle, we get flatter and flatter and flatter. And the problem is we aren't built to comprehend the scale of the world. Our minds are built to deal with the everyday things that we see in our lives. They aren't built to deal with magnitude of that size. And so when you appeal to someone's gut instincts, you appeal to what they can observe. And it's very hard to persuade someone that what you're looking at right now is a curve. It's just too subtle for you to notice. You have to really understand the model and understand how subtle that curvature actually is to understand why the horizon looks flat. Then we have this thing about airborne objects, you know, cannonballs flying, helicopters flying. How is it possible that a cannonball can fly through the air on a spherical world and not shoot off to one side at 1,000 miles an hour because you spin away from it? And what this is missing is that when the cannonball leaves the cannon, if the cannon's traveling at 1,000 miles an hour to the west, so is the cannonball. When it leaves the cannon, it was already traveling at 1,000 miles an hour in that direction. And it travels through air that's also spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. And there's that preservation of momentum, which isn't instinctual. It doesn't feel true. It doesn't feel at a gut level true. You have to really understand the physics of the world to understand why this is true. And there's a great illustration of this. This is a trampoline being pulled by a tractor at 20 miles an hour. And you can see this man in the red, he's going to jump up and down on this trampoline. And your gut tells you that because the trampoline's moving, the second he leaves the trampoline, he's going to fly backwards. As the trampoline, he's going to hit that wall, or he's going to go up and over the wall and land on the ground as the trampoline moves as he leaves it. But actually what happens is, because he leaves the trampoline traveling at 20 miles an hour, he preserves that momentum and he lands back. He's actually traveling in an arc and landing back on the trampoline. This doesn't feel true, But it works when you look at the physics, when you really investigate the physics. You have to really understand the model that you're dismissing and interrogating before you're able to do the work about it. So it's not about going with your gut, it's about going with an understanding of what's going on. The same is true with the water argument, about water bending, about water travelling uphill. This is a chap who at the UK convention said, I can prove to you the world is actually flat and I can prove it using a glass of water. He said, if I pour a glass of water over my head, which he did on camera, he said, you'll see that the water runs off my head because it can't stick to the sides of my head. It won't all just stay on this spherical object, it'll run off. And if there was water on a ball earth, all that water would roll off the earth. It can't stick to a ball. But what they're missing is, again, they haven't fully understood the model they're dismissing. This is one of their memes. This is straight from flat earth literature, saying if rivers are running to the sea, those rivers on a globe earth would have to go uphill. Whereas on a flat earth, those same rivers, once you flatten it out, are running downhill, and that makes sense. But what they're missing is they think gravity is doing that. It's pulling down. And at the top of the curve, it's pulling straight down, but at the sides of the curve, it's pulling perpendicular to the curve. That's the model of gravity they have in their head. And if I apply that model of gravity to their meme, they're right. The water has to be running uphill at those sides if gravity is doing that. But gravity isn't doing that. Gravity's pulling towards the center of the curve. So gravity's actually doing that. At every different point, it's pulling directly towards the center of the circle. And if we apply that version of gravity to their own meme, we can see pretty clearly that at each of those sides, the water is running downhill. But you have to understand the world before you dismiss it. You can't just dismiss something based on the first thing you can think of to dismiss it. You have to really understand it first. They make this argument a lot about what about aeroplanes traveling. They say this is a flight from Sydney to Santiago, and it refuels in America. This, they say, makes no sense in a globe model. Why would they have to come all the way to the northern hemisphere to come all the way south again? This can't be true, but if we apply it to a flat earth model, it's a straight line. This makes suddenly way more sense. This has to be true. The airplane movements themselves prove the world has to be flat and not spherical. But again, what they're missing is what they're really looking at here. Are they looking at planes that are just refueling, or are they looking at planes that are also changing their passengers? Because how many people are going directly from Sydney to Santiago or back again, or how many of them are trying to go from Sydney to America or Sydney to Europe, and they're using America as the place to interchange? And that's what's actually happening. They change their passengers. And actually what's really interesting is since that meme was created by flat earthers saying the only way to get from Sydney to Santiago is via America, it's no longer true because it turns out more people want to go from Sydney to Santiago, that it's now commercially viable, and Qantas flies directly from Sydney to Santiago, a direct flight, and the direct flight only takes 14 hours because it takes a shortcut over Antarctica, over the Arctic Circle, and is able to shorten the flight in that way. So what have I learned from spending time with flat earthers, from investigating this movement, from trying to understand it? Well, I think I've learned a few things. It's very easy to say that these people don't care about science, and I think that's false. I think they do care about science. It's not that they reject the idea of science. I think they want to be scientific. I've met flat earthers who are doing scientific experiments. They're putting cameras in their gardens on tripods to watch the way the moon moves across the sky, and then to plug those calculations into the official figures and compare them to what the moon should be doing. And when they find a discrepancy between their figures and the official figures, they say that's because the official figures are lies because the world isn't actually round, it's flat. What they're missing is the methodology they're using isn't very accurate. They may have moved the tripod slightly. They may have slightly refocused the camera. Their measuring isn't fully accurate, but they're trying to do something scientific. They maybe aren't very good at investigating their own models and understanding the flaws in their methodology, what they're trying to measure and how it measures it. But they are trying to be scientific. I think it's not about rejecting science, but I think this movement is much more about value systems and beliefs and rhetoric. It's these ideas of common sense arguments that hit you in the gut before they hit you in the head. They make you feel like the answer's right before they make you think about the evidence for it. And I think with a lot of people, they come to the flat earth movement because it fits something in the way they already saw the world. So when you ask them, why do you think the world is flat? And they talk about curvature calculations. That isn't why they think the world is flat. That's how they continue to justify thinking the world is flat. They think the world is flat for lots of other reasons, because they believe the world is 6,000 years old and the Bible's literally true. Or it might be because they believe that there is an Illuminati in control of everything, and that the fact that the world is round is just another of the lies that they tell you. That's why they believe the world is actually flat. And that the reasons they tell you is just how they try and persuade you and how they justify themselves. But for a lot of people, you get to your conclusion, and then you find the evidence to justify why you made that decision, why you made that leap. I think that's what's going on here. I think YouTube has a massive role to play, and I can come to that in the questions if people are interested. What I've learned is there isn't one flat Earth belief. We might think that the world looks like this to a flat earther, but actually there's multiple different models. There's a circle Earth, the infinite plane Earth, the enclosed world, the diamond world. One guy I met thought the Earth was in a giant cosmic egg shape. I could have gone on for a long time about that idea. If you're going to speak to a flat earther and try to get them to question the version of the world that they see, you first have to understand what version of the world they think about. There's no point talking to someone about the disk world when actually they believe in the infinite plane world, because your arguments will make no sense, because it won't be about what they have in their head. You have to listen to people and understand them before you can start to argue and debate and converse with them. But it's also important to understand that flat Earth isn't just one belief. Yes, you believe the world is flat, but you also might believe that the Bible's literally true. The world is 6,000 years old, that Satan is everywhere, that Satan is in control of NASA, that the Illuminati and the New World Order run the world, and that they may or may not be Jewish in doing so. That vaccines are evil, that medicines, alternative medicines and cures for cancer are true, that chemtrails are poisoning us, that fluoride's poisoning us. All these things exist together. And if we see flat Earth in isolation, we miss the bigger picture. I think the bigger picture is it's not about accepting a belief. I think it's much more about rejecting the mainstream belief, rejecting the conventional view of the world. Everyone else is wrong in the way they see the world. They are the sheeple. They are the followers, and I've got this knowledge, and I'm part of the community that has access to this secret knowledge, access to this, the real truth of what's going on. My eyes are open. I've taken the red pill. I think that's what's going on here much more. I also think people come to the flat Earth belief for lots of different reasons, and for some people, some of those reasons might be because of a traumatic event, a personal crisis. And I think we shouldn't dismiss that, and we should be sympathetic and empathetic when we talk to people for that reason. There are people that I've met who I think, and I haven't spoken about today, who I think who come to the flat Earth belief at a time in their life when they were experiencing a personal crisis, and they felt like there was nothing they could connect with. And then they came across this idea, and it spoke to something in them. And when you meet someone who's been through a crisis or even a mental health crisis, it might be that they are completely cured of that. They're completely over the issues that they had. But during the period of crisis, they've changed the direction they were heading. And now they're perfectly fine again. They don't realize they're heading in a completely different direction. And I think we have to understand that there is a personal element to this and be empathetic towards that. And I think the overall take I have is that if we want to try and reach people, and the reason I'm a skeptical activist is I want to try and reach people. I want to try and increase the level of critical thinking in the world, increase the level of people who are trying to access as best as we can the reality around us based on evidence. And I think if we want to do that, the way we can do that is by understanding, not by mockery. I don't think people change their mind because you've called them names, because you've told them how superior you are to them, how inferior they are to you. I think they change their mind by making a connection with them, by feeling they've been listened to, by feeling they've been connected with. And I think if we're going to reach people, I think that's the way that we do it, by trying to be understanding, by proving to them that we're interested in them, and by reaching them at an interpersonal level, humane level first. So that's my talk. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be happy to take questions, but thank you.
Thank you a lot. It was a very lots of information, a very enlightening lecture. I believe everybody here was as blown off as you as I. Now, so we are opening for questions. If you are watching online, you can send questions through the email earesponde, uma palavra só, @usp.br. And for questions from the audience, please.
Maybe I should introduce myself. I am Arnaldo Mando. I'm from the math department, the computer science department, actually. Have you ever met a flat earther that has read Terry Pratchett? And in that case, whether they find it inspirational or heretical?
So this question does come up quite a lot, and I have to admit, and this isn't a good thing to admit, I've never read any Terry Pratchett. I'm aware that they have the Discworld idea. I think they will have read it. And I think, I'm not sure, they have multiple different views on it. Some might say, well, you know, they're drawing on truths to make a fiction. Others will say, well, they're just ridiculing us with these ideas because they know it's true and they want to sort of suppress it. But others might think it's a work of fiction and enjoyable. But yeah, I don't know how they personally feel too strongly about it. No, any other questions about anything at all? You don't have to be shy, anything at all? Oh, there you go.
So, hi, my name is Pedro. I'm a philosopher, and I'm interested about what you thought about technology's roles, especially about YouTube. You mentioned that. So, what do you think about YouTube's roles in flat Earth belief?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think YouTube has a huge role to play, and I've worked with the BBC on investigating this too. So I think the reason YouTube is so influential is this recommendation algorithm, this idea that you're watching a video, it recommends you the next video. And how YouTube used to do that, and they've tried to change a little bit, is they would say, YouTube obviously want to keep you watching. Their business model is how many hours are being watched all the time. It allows them to sell more expensive advertising to say millions of hours per day are being watched. So the more time you're watching, the better. And what they used to do is they would say, if a video is being watched a lot, if many people have clicked on it, this must be a good video. And what they would miss there is that some people would click on a video because they believed it. Some people would click on it because they thought it was silly and fun. Some people would click on it because they wanted to do their own video making a rejection of every single one of the points. And they'd watch the video 10 times to go through every single one of the points in detail. YouTube wouldn't see 3 different audiences. They'd see one audience 3 times the size. This must be a really good video. Look at all these people watching it. And so they'd be more likely to raise it that way. They changed a little bit after a while and said, if you click on it and you only watch the first 10 seconds and you move on, it can't have been a very good video. So we'll now say the amount of time in total that video has been watched. So if you have an hour-long video and you have lots of people making it all the way to the end, that's much better than lots of people watching a series of 5-minute videos. So the long videos that you make it to the end of, even if you're watching it because you want to say how much fun it is and how silly it is, or if you're watching it because you want to debunk every single argument, you're going to watch all the way to the end to do that. And so you're still giving all this attention to this video. So YouTube would identify videos based in that kind of way, and they would flag videos up that are potentially interesting based on this kind of how much time have been watched. And then they would start recommending videos to people. And we know from studies that there's a huge number of people, a huge percentage of people who will watch the first thing that's recommended to them on YouTube. You finish watching a video, you may even have the autoplay set. So one video finishes, the next one recommended will play. And so people were starting to watch the recommended video. And YouTube would say, well, you're watching this video of the Earth from space. We'll see if you're interested in the Flat Earth video. If you are interested in that video, if you do click it, well, you like the Flat Earth video. So we'll show you another Flat Earth video, because maybe that will keep you watching. If we can tempt you to watch another video, we'll keep you watching. Once you've watched a couple, they say, well, you really like Flat Earth videos. So we're just going to keep giving you Flat Earth videos now. And this starts to change the way people see the world because they see so much of this content. So that was one of the ways that it was starting to work, is that once they started to show you a video, they would continue showing more and more videos of that kind of way. And the other way that people got into watching it initially is that when you search for certain terms, some of the most sensational titles will be the ones that you clicked on. So if you searched about the videos of the Earth from space, and there was a video saying, this video from the Earth from space is wrong and a lie by NASA, that sensationalism makes you say, oh, that's interesting. I don't think it's true, but I'm going to watch it anyway. And so you can get people in that kind of way. Now, I think this is something that's very, very similar, I think, to the way that Google used to be with search ranking. Now, it used to be that you could put a sensational title to your website with lots of keywords that had nothing to do with your website, but were very popular keywords, and people would click on it thinking that, oh, this must be about that particular thing. And so Google changed the way that they would rank websites so that you couldn't cheat in that way. And people would find a new way of cheating, hiding text in white on a white background. So when you search for certain words, you can't read it with your eyes, but the computer can see that it's there. And Google changed so that didn't work anymore. And so you had this constant battle between Google changing the way it worked and people trying to find a way to cheat it, and Google fixing that cheat and finding a new way to work. And eventually Google got to a place where it's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good at eradicating these false directions, these false websites that are trying to cheat your attention. But Google did that because commercially they're a search engine. And a search engine that returns you irrelevant results is a search engine people won't use. It's a terrible index and people will go to Bing or they'll go somewhere else, ask Jeeves. They'll find a different way of doing it. So Google commercially were incentivized to fix that problem. YouTube isn't a search engine. It's an engagement engine. It's an entertainment engine. So long as they're still being sensational, and so long as they're keeping you watching hour after hour after hour, it doesn't matter whether what they're returning is relevant. It only matters that it's engaging, that you watch it. And I think one of the issues with YouTube is that they don't have commercial pressures to fix it. Or if they do, those pressures aren't as significant as they were for Google. So they are trying to change things, but they have this kind of engine in place that drives people to a more extreme position because it goes through sensationalism and then the recommending and the recommending and the recommending of the algorithm does that. They're not doing it on purpose, but the algorithm's blind and just returns you what it thinks will fit. Now, I think that's true not just of Flat Earth. I think that's true of some of the other things that we see exacerbated by social media, exacerbated by extremism via YouTube. I think we see it in misogyny online. Lots of people going towards the men's rights activists and these types of ideas of, feminism is an evil thing that's ruling the world. And these types of extreme radicalizing is driven by the same kind of sensational engine and recommendation engine. I think we see it with white supremacy too. I think we see it with some of the more extreme politics that we're seeing around the world, driven in the same kind of way. So there is this technological driver. And unfortunately, I'm normally a pretty optimistic person, but I'm pessimistic here because I don't think YouTube have, for YouTube to fix this, they'd have to say we need to stop making as much money. We need to find ways of making less money, but by doing a public good. And I don't think YouTube are incentivized to do that. I think they'll still want to try and chase the money. They'll say we're fixing it, but how well they fix it, I think I'm yet to be very convinced that they'll do a very thorough job fixing it. Yeah.
Okay. Lia Amaral from Physics Institute. So the main point, I think, is really that there is not one belief of this is the basic point, because human beings are completely crazy. This we know for everything of human history. And what we call science, it is something that starts with some rationalization, and then very, very slowly over time and generations reaches one point that it is the main line. And also this thing about the earth, and this comes from the beginning of our understanding, and it was very difficult to reach some common sense about it. Now, if you look really what happened at the Galileo's time, it's not at all trivial. And it was not possible to decide for one theory or another. It was really a kind of belief. Either you have the belief or you don't have the belief. So science goes very slowly, reaching something that there is one thinking. But then this comes out to be destroyed, but by somebody that it is out of the mainstream, always. And the point is that we are in a very difficult moment nowadays. There is not one belief about anything any longer. And especially if you see politics and everything that rules, in fact, woman power, it's completely crazy. If you want to look what is being discussed among lawyers and among judges in Brazil, they are all completely crazy. There is not at all something to be found as a direction or something that everybody agrees, not at all. And the point is that science is not unique. It's not only that there is one flat earth belief. There is not one science belief. It's many, many small things that are considered to be scientifically proved, but they don't join each other. So you may, as a physicist, there are lots of things in which I believe, but I know that everything about life and human beings, it's out of scientific knowledge on a real sense. So lawyers even use rhetoric to defend opposite points of view.
Yeah.
That's considered to be okay. So I think what is wrong is to believe that humankind is rational.
I agree. I do agree that functionally we aren't instinctively rational beings. And I think skepticism is a perverse instinct, that, and science, in a way, is a perverse instinct that gets us to a better place. But you have to fight against some of your natural inclinations to do so. You have to, in any given time, what you want to be doing is say, I think this thing, how do I prove that I'm right? That's our instinct to do that. I think I'm right, how do I prove that I'm right? And the way to really get anywhere is to say, I think this thing, how do I prove that I'm wrong? If I run out of ways to prove that I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. And I have to hold on to the idea that maybe I'll find a way to prove myself wrong one day. And that's how we're able to investigate the world and start to make scientific discoveries and discoveries about the nature of reality, the nature of the universe, not by saying, I have an idea, I'm going to prove it right, but by saying, I have an idea, I'm going to try as hard as I can to prove it wrong. And when I run out of ways to do that, maybe I can accept it as true. But it goes counter to our nature. It goes counter to what our gut tells us is the way to be. But it's the only way to progress things forward, is to try and prove ourselves wrong and hold on to the idea that we may still be wrong one day. Even if we've tried everything we can, we may still be wrong. We get the chances of it get less and less the more work we do to prove that to try and prove that we're wrong and fail. But you have to hold on to the idea that all knowledge is essentially provisional, but some knowledge is more provisional than others because it's been more and more proved. Yeah. Do you have another question from anyone? Ah, fantastic.
Hi, my name is Marcia. I'm from the Atmospheric Science Department. And my question is, what we can do as scientists to change the flat Earth belief? And should we do something? Should we worry about it?
So I think we should worry about it, not necessarily because people think the world is flat, but because these other beliefs that come alongside of it. And I think some people will say, well, they think the world is flat, there's no harm there, it doesn't matter, let them think that it's silly. And I totally disagree with that. I think it's important that we do continue to be connected to people. Because if you teach people to accept that consensus and investigation and expertise is wrong in one area, you undermine the value of consensus and the value of expertise in all areas. So I think it is important that we reach them. And I found this when I was at the UK's Flat Earth Convention, and there were journalists there who were saying, well, isn't this fun? Isn't this silly? And I said, well, you could report it that way, but if you really want to know what's going on, do you see that couple over there who've got a baby with them? Go and ask if the child's vaccinated. Ask them if tomorrow that child took ill, would you go and take them to a doctor who you think are being run by Big Pharma and the Illuminati and chemtrails and all this stuff, or would you go and see someone else? Because I think once you abandon people and say, you're over there, you disagree with us, so I don't care about you anymore, you leave them to all these terrible ideas as well. So I think it is important that we do reach people. And I think the most important way to do that, I think there's lots of ways to do it. The way that I choose to do it is to try and, first of all, maintain the fact that these people are people. I hate the idea of people, especially who are very involved in skepticism. They may have done skepticism for a long time, and they say, I'm a skeptic, so I'm right. And I'll tell you the truth. I'll tell you what's right. And I'll just give you the information, and it is, give people the facts, and they'll change their mind. And if they don't, I don't care. I think that's nonsense. People don't change their mind like that. And the idea that we as skeptics and scientists, that if we try and elevate ourselves to being perfect, we miss the fact that we're also flawed. I guarantee I have some beliefs that are completely wrong. I don't know what they are, and when I find them, I'll try and change them. But you have to admit that, you have to accept that we're always flawed, and that these people aren't worse than us, it's just their flaws are different, and we can see these flaws and try and correct them. And if someone can see mine, hopefully they'll try and correct those too. So I think by continuing to reach people, by putting humanity into it, by accepting that we aren't flawless, perfect purveyors of all knowledge, that we can be wrong about things, that we're all part of the society together, and that by joining everyone together, we get further forward together. I think that's the way that we can do it. Now, I'm fortunate that I'm not a scientist. I don't have a PhD. I don't have a title. I don't have that to defend. I think it's very useful for this movement to be able to say, this doctor, she knows everything about this. She is the expert. And I'm going to communicate that and introduce her, and you can hear from her, from the expert. But I'm also going to talk to the patient. I'm going to talk to other patients in these areas and try and have a plurality of voices, of which expertise is one of those. But I think if we over-rely on expertise and say, we're right because we're experts, I think that's when we cut people off, and people can't connect with that. We have to remember how we talk to each other. And the way that we communicate is through stories. We tell stories all the time. It's how we reach people. And if we can find the way to put the stories back into the work that we're doing, we can then use those stories to deliver accurate data, rather than say, the statistics say that you're wrong, and that's all that matters. It isn't all that matters. How you can convey those is what really matters, and whether people can go along with you. And the way that I try and tell this is through a personal story of the conversations I've had and the interesting things that I've found, as well as trying to tell the scientific information too, because I think it means that people can tune in and hear it in a way that if I just said, here's why the world is actually round, here's what flat earthers say, isn't this wrong, isn't it ridiculous, aren't they stupid, nobody would listen, and I'd feel terrible about myself for saying it that way. So yeah, we have to maintain that humanity, I think.
We have two questions that came from email. First from Gustavo Beocchi. Would you say that the main problem with the flat earth way of thinking is their a priori approach? Which other problems in their approach to reality, or to how they look at the earth, would you say appear in their way of thinking?
Yeah, that's a tricky thing to answer, really, I think. I think a big part of the problem is what I was saying a moment ago, I guess, is that that failure to look for ways that they're wrong. It's first and foremost, I'm right, and I can support that through all of this evidence. I can prove that I'm right for these reasons. But if you're never looking to prove yourself wrong, you don't actually ever see what's really going on. And I think that's what we see a lot of the time in the flat earth movement, is finding the first argument they can find that proves themselves right, and the first thing they think they can find that proves the other side wrong, whether that's a full understanding of the other side or not. I think a lot of the time, flat earthers don't spend, the people in the flat earth movement that I've met haven't spent the time really understanding what the round earth model is. So they will come up with arguments like, if you're in Australia, you're upside down and you'd fall off. They'll come up with arguments like, helicopters can't, planes can't travel faster than the spinning of the earth, which aren't really understanding what the world is like. It's finding a reason to dismiss something without having to spend the time understanding it. So I think that pattern, unfortunately, doesn't just apply to what shape the world is. It applies to these other things too. What is the background of NASA? How old is the Earth? Do vaccines work? They apply the same level of thinking to it, and the same assumptions that I must be right about something, I'm going to prove myself true, rather than I have this idea, how do I disprove it? And I think that's the main problem I see in this area of thinking.
Next question that came from the email comes from Alfredo Jabor. I'll rephrase a little because he makes a question very pointed about the Brazilian situation, but I think we can generalize it a little. You said that lots of extreme beliefs come with flat Earth, and the far-right ideas, misogynistic ideas, creationism, very toxic forms of religious extremism. How do we deal with these peripheral beliefs? You're defending a dialogical approach, a friendly approach. Would this work with political extremism also?
I think so, and I do just want to clarify, when I talk about extreme misogyny and white supremacy, I'm not saying those are in the flat earth movement, but I'm saying that the path that people use to get to flat earth, that path is very similar to radicalizing people to these other positions. So I don't want to say that, I'm not saying flat earthers are all extreme misogynists, but I'm saying their radicalization process is very similar. So I just want to clarify that. But in terms of how we reach people, I think dialogue is absolutely the way, I think. And I think treating people with humanity, with respect, not calling them names and assuming they're stupid or inferior, I think that's the way that we reach people, is to carry on keeping connected. By not say, it's very easy to say, they believe something that is totally different to me, so they can be over there and I never need to think about them. But I think we need to sort of bring people back. And I think that's also true of political extremism. And the way that you can reach people and have them check their ideas and question their ideas, I use an analogy for the way that I go about it that I think is useful. The analogy is, if you look at what would happen if an asteroid was going to hit the Earth. Okay? The Hollywood way of fixing that problem is you send up a team of miners with a nuclear bomb, send up Bruce Willis on a spaceship, and he blows that asteroid up. And the asteroid, in reality, if you did that, if you blew an asteroid up that was heading towards the Earth, all those pieces of asteroid would just rain down on the Earth. You wouldn't fix the problem, as you just spread the devastation. And that's what happens when you're arguing with somebody who disagree with you and you hit them head on with an argument. Big explosion, devastation, nothing productive. That's what happens when you do that. But if you talk to astronomers about the way that we would actually deal with an asteroid impact now, is you see that the asteroid is on a collision course, and you send up a body with enough mass to hang around near the asteroid, that the gravitational pull of just being near it, over time, very, very slowly, will alter the direction that asteroid is moving. And eventually, you may not even realize that the path has changed, but eventually that gravity will pull it away so it's no longer on a collision course. And that's how you change people's mind. You don't do it head on, you do it by being near them, by being connected to them, by asking little questions, by continuing to be the person in their lives that they love and respect, and just by saying, I'm interested in this, but when I try and follow it, I struggle to understand this. How do you explain this bit? Because I can't follow you, and I want to understand why you think that way. And if you do that, and you're not trying to do everything all at once, you can slowly get people to readdress and reassess what they think, and even change their mind as a result. But it takes time, and you have to be invested in them as people, and they have to be invested in you and people. You won't do it in a Facebook argument with a stranger. You will do it if you're spending 6 months talking to your brother-in-law who may have some strange beliefs, and you do it without being insulting. You do it without being dismissive or patronizing and condescending. You do it by being honest and respectful.
Well, question there.
Marcelo Yamashita from Quest of Science and Institute of Theoretical Physics. My question is, how can you be reasonable with the people who deny facts? Because it's not, in my opinion, it's not a kind of a lack of knowledge, but they are denying facts. Don't you think it's like play chess against pigeons?
I guess it can be, but I think the key is to not play chess. I don't treat it as a debate or a game. If I was in a room where I was expected to play chess with a pigeon, I might spend my time trying to learn about pigeons, because I've got this opportunity with a pigeon in front of me to study pigeons.
My point is that they do not recognize the rules of the game.
Yeah, they don't. And so you're right, they don't recognize the rules of the game. And I think that is true when you're in a position where you have to debate with someone. And I think it does change depending on the purpose of the conversation that you're having. When I interview people who I disagree with, the purpose of my conversation isn't to change their mind, but it's to understand as much as possible about what they think. And maybe I'll give them the questions that will change their mind later on, but I'm not trying to do it in that conversation. That would be very different if I was in front of a large audience and I had a flat earther there and it was me versus a flat earther in a debate. I'd have a different tactic, because in that place I'm trying to influence the audience. But even then, I think when you go head to head with somebody, what happens is you come up with arguments that they've already thought about. And they've already thought about them and they already have a rebuttal. And you just go through a dance that they've done 1,000,000 times and you might have done 1,000,000 times. When you're talking to a creationist who thinks the world is 6,000 years old, if you do all the things that they're expecting them and they give you the same old defenses all the time and no one really learns anything. So you have to think of a different way of doing it. And in that way, I try and have a conversation. And I try and turn it into an actual conversation rather than an aggressive debate, to try and say, well, tell me a bit more about that. And when I come to that point, here's where I struggle to understand. So how do you explain this bit of it? Because I struggle to follow you there. And if you do that, what happens is instead of their defenses going down, you can open them up and you can walk around their belief with them, and then you can walk around the maze that's inside their head. And if you're doing that and you're able to have it in a way that people are buying into the conversation and they genuinely think you're interested, the only way to do that is to be genuinely interested, you can walk around that maze, and occasionally you can say, let's turn left here, and there's a wall they didn't know was there because they've never done that before. Because the only time they've ever talked to people they disagree with has been the same conversation they've had a million times. So by having a collaborative approach, you can actually go in a different direction, but you have to be very careful about the audience that you have. And when it comes to a subject like homeopathy, for example, I don't do debates about whether homeopathy works, because that is a completely settled subject. And if I go on the radio, as I do quite often in the UK, and they say, well, we're going to have a talk about, we've got a homeopath here, and we're going to talk about how great homeopathy is, and they're going to say it's great, and you're going to say it's wrong, we'll have this debate. I say, well, we're not going to have this conversation, because you wouldn't have the homeopath on if I wasn't there. So by me being there, you're facilitating these arguments, their arguments to be heard, and then people will call in and tell you how great homeopathy is and that it works. And what you've done as a show is just tell the audience that homeopathy works. So I don't get involved there. I say there are genuine questions to be had, but that isn't one of them. So it's picking and choosing the battles, and the battles you choose, treating them not as a battle, but as a conversation. And that's how I go about it. And when I do meet someone or I interview someone who is being particularly aggressive, fortunately, the places in which I typically interview people, my listeners know that. And there's nothing I like more than when I talk to someone. I talked to a guy who was an AIDS denialist. He believes that AIDS doesn't really exist. He believes it's all a consequence of immoral lifestyles. And he was very aggressive to me. And I thought, great, I don't need to do anything to prove your argument's wrong here, because your tone and the way you're insulting me and the way you're condescending me is doing it all for me. People who hear this will say, this isn't a nice man. I'm not invested in what he has to say. So it's about understanding the audience and picking your battles, I think.
People? Yeah.
Yeah. So, the title was The Rise of Flat Earth Belief. But don't you think that we are going to see soon the down of the flat Earth belief?
Yes, yeah, I think it's
That's
already going.
Yes, I mean, it's so obviously wrong that, and we understand why these things pop up. But I think that it is enough to don't give it too much attention, and it will fade out.
So,
I think other things can pop up, because that's just one detail. Much more dangerous is things that are really something to do with the life of people. Like, for instance, don't take vaccination or something like that. This is really dangerous, and you must really do something about it. But other things that are not really important, if people believe in what they want to believe, let them believe. Fight against, it's just useless.
So yeah, I would disagree. I understand what you're saying.
You must choose, you must give priority to which are the things that are really worthwhile fighting against. Others are just...
So I do see what you're saying, and I think it's valid, but I think there's a few things with that. First of all, you are right that flat Earth belief is starting to go again. It's starting to get much smaller. But I think the reason it's getting smaller isn't because it was left alone. It's because people turned attention to it. And so you had a flat Earth belief, and then people were saying some things that people found interesting, and it spoke to people's gut level, and it got bigger. And then it got bigger enough to a point where scientists and people would start to see how big it was getting and say, this is ridiculous. And then it got bigger enough that people who are not only good at figuring out why it's wrong, but are also excellent at communicating it, they were turning their attention to it. And at that point, it starts to get smaller again because people first encounter it through those debunks first. So I think by giving it some attention, it actually collapsed the bubble. It expanded and then it collapsed for that reason, I think. I also think Flat Earth is a good case study in understanding irrational beliefs because it isn't tainted by the possibility of being true. You know, when it comes to ideas of GMOs, you know, it's very hard. You can't point to a single fact that proves that GMOs are actually safe. You have to understand an awful lot about it to understand why that it's just another new technology doing something we've been doing for centuries, but doing it a different way. It's a lot more involved thing to understand before you know that it's definitely safe. Similar with when it comes to social issues like white supremacy, misogyny, things like that. You can't point to a single fact that proves those ideas are wrong. But you can point to facts very clearly with the flat earth that prove it wrong. So by understanding the flat earth, we can understand irrationality, untainted by the possibility of it being true. Understand the processes that drive it, the processes that reinforce it. And then once you understand that skeleton, you can see how that skeleton applies to these other beliefs and whether we can learn anything about them. I also think with flat earth, you're absolutely right that believing the world is flat is not as dangerous as believing that vaccines don't work. But those two ideas aren't separate. I haven't met many flat earthers who believe vaccines are safe. I haven't met many flat earthers who believe the Holocaust happened. One of my favorite questions to ask flat earthers is, before we get into the details of flat earth, tell me about the Holocaust, what do you think? And so many of them would say, well, I don't think it really happened, or there's no evidence it was 6 million Jewish people. So I think flat earth isn't just one belief, it is a cluster of beliefs. And it may be the thing that's kind of bringing a lot of people together, or some numbers of people together around that belief, but it isn't by itself. At the heart of it, it's about irrationality, it's about inability to see through rhetoric, it's about inability to recognize what's a good argument, what's a bad argument. And by using flat earth as a case study on that, you can then apply those principles to other things as well. So we can move them into vaccines. And I'm also fortunate that I do this for a living, so I don't spend all my time on flat earth. I do spend my time on the vaccines and on homeopathy and alternative medicine and cancer cures. This is just one avenue of it. So we do have to prioritize, but we aren't so limited in time that we only have to focus on one thing. So yeah.
Well, we'll have one final question. Unfortunately, we are getting ahead of time. It comes from an email from Marcelo Portualen, who is an astronomer and a physics teacher. Do you think that changes in the educational system, for instance, introducing proper scientific thinking in middle-level schools, would be effective to avoid the irrational beliefs developing like flat Earth?
Yeah, I do, and so I get asked this question quite a lot. People ask me when I give talks about alternative medicine, for example. People say, should we teach critical thinking in school? Should we teach children that homeopathy doesn't work? And I say yes and no. That we absolutely should teach critical thinking, but we shouldn't tell kids what does and doesn't work and think that that's the job done. Because the last thing I want is for kids to learn that homeopathy is ineffective because it's just sugar water, and when they walk down the street, they laugh at the homeopath's clinic there and they walk straight into a chiropractor, or they walk straight into a cancer cure clinic because they've learned a list of things that do and don't work, but haven't learned the process of figuring things out. I think what we need to be teaching is how we know what's true, how we check ideas, the way we can verify things. That instinct or the principle of going against your instinct to say, I have an idea, how do I prove it wrong? That's kind of fundamental in scientific thinking. And I think actually, the philosopher was here earlier, and I think philosophy is a great way of doing that. We undervalue the process of philosophy, the values of philosophy, which is, how do we know what's true? How do we understand how we can recognize truth in the world around us and figure stuff out? I think that's really, really key. And one of the things that I've been doing a little bit in the UK is I give a version of this talk to schools. Now, it doesn't go into all the different flat earthers and the psychology, because it's much more school appropriate. But what I do is I give 10 reasons to believe the world is flat. And I don't tell the audience that I'm not a flat earther. I say, here are 10 reasons we should believe the world is flat. And I take them from the 10 most common arguments I see from flat earthers. And I say, the flat earthers say, question everything all the time. And I give them the 10 arguments. And then in the middle of the talk, I say, we should question everything. Let's question me. Let's go back over each of those 10 arguments and see if we can see if there's anything wrong with each of those 10 and what's actually really going on. And so you can then use that to say, this is how you can do rhetoric to be persuasive, but how we have to go through that. We have to look through and see what's really at the substance and how we get to that substance. And I think that's one of the principles. And again, I think flat earth is quite a useful teaching tool for that, because it's got elements that are fun and silly, but you can really use it to demonstrate the scientific method, to demonstrate how we can check ideas, and to prepare people to be critical thinkers, to prepare students to have those skills, to then apply those skills elsewhere.
Thank you, Michael. It was very great lecture and the question and answer section. So this was the last installment of our seminar about what we can learn from ignorance. And I think Natalia would have to make a final announcement before we close the seminar.
I'd just like to thank you all for all here for coming and who've been following us through this whole cycle of seminars, which was an initiative of the Institute of Advanced Sciences, Advanced Studies here in the University of São Paulo, and the Institute Question of Science. And we hope we can have another cycle of seminars next year. But I really wish to thank one very special person who really was the architect of the whole event, and that's Lenin Bicudo Barbara. He was the one who came up with the idea of having a cycle of seminars about ignorance and what we can learn from ignorance. And I think that it developed really well, and everyone who's been following all of our meetings knows that this is what university is all about, is for us to get together and discuss things that are relevant to critical thinking and to our development as thinkers and scientists. So I want to thank personally Lenny. He's very shy, but he's here, and I want us all to, if you can come up front, please, so that people at home can see you. I think this is the man that we should be applauding, because he's the one that set this whole thing together, and I hope that next year we can have something else entirely different, maybe. Do you want to say a few words?
I just would like to thank you all for coming, you, Natalia, for your kind words, and Marshall for the excellent talk on the rise of flat Earth belief. And I hope we continue discussing the topic of ignorance, because there is a lot of it in this world, and so there will be a lot to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us in this cycle of seminars, and I hope next year we'll have some more.